Hello everyone, welcome to our weekly SIG meeting. Today we have 4 items on the official agenda. The first one is an announcement from me and the Guy. Guy, do you want to take this part?
Sure. Yeah, for those, I'd imagine by now most people are aware. For those who aren't aware, over the past sort of few months, we've been having discussions with the Carpenter team about Carpenter, which is effectively an alternative model for cluster node scaling to the cluster autoscaler, and about it moving to a neutral governance home underneath the SIG. We have been working with them on a number of documents, sort of on how we would converge the two, and in terms of configuration, where the two have similar concepts, etc. There is a document linked in the meeting notes there. The proposal at the moment is that we're gathering feedback, but barring any blocking concerns on this, the intent is that we would move forward with adopting Carpenter as a sub-project of the SIG alongside the existing ones. So please have a look through if you have any concerns with that document, comment on it, or let us know in SIG Slack, or you can also email the SIG leads mailing address as well.
Any questions, comments, concerns, anything about this particular part? I take the silence as no, and I assume that if we don't hear any strong feedback by this Friday, it means that the community is okay with the proposal and the merge is a go and will be executed on the first possibility, like probably like before Cube. We'll try to merge before KubeCon. Chances are that it will happen after KubeCon, but the announcements will happen really, really soon. Anyway, we are waiting until Friday. If you have anything against it, please let us know. Okay, the next item is from Vada Sambar Suraj. Do we have anyone? No. Guy, any updates on adding the reviewers?
No, my focus has been on the Carpenter discussions to this point, to be honest. I think once we adopt Carpenter, once we start doing the work, assuming we adopt Carpenter, sorry, if we do, once we start doing the work to break things out there, in terms of as a separate repo, that'll make a bit clearer about how we can follow that model to make permissions easier to grant to new users, because that's one of the things at the moment. The permissions model for the SIG's sub-projects is not particularly granular. So I'd like to resolve that as part of this.
Okay, thank you. San Poshiho. Sorry if I mispronounce it.
Yep, right. Hello. Can you hear me?
Well,
Hello.
yeah, we can hear you. Loud and
Okay,
clear.
sorry. So I want to talk about the one proposal about fallback mode in pot topology spread, but moreover, it can lead to a discussion of how we generally achieve such fallback mode in the scheduling constraints, various scheduling constraints. So yeah, so basically I want hear some feedbacks from mainly cluster autoscaler teams, because it's mainly SIG scheduling area, but also obviously the cluster autoscaler would also involve in it. So current design is like so at currently we set some pod condition when scheduling is failing for that pod, and cluster autoscaler notices that condition and tried to create new node. And in order to achieve this fallback mode, we want to receive somehow the response from cluster autoscaler when the cluster autoscaler cannot bring a new node for such unschedulable pods. So the current proposal is like proposing introducing a new pod condition triggered scale up, and the cluster autoscaler would set this condition to false if they can't create a new node for this particular pod. And the scheduler when the scheduler realizes such trigger scale up false in pod, then they will like fall back to like assume the pod topology spread as preferred scheduling constraint and try to schedule such pod anyway via like considering as preferred scheduling constraint. So this is current overview of this proposal around the cluster autoscaler domain. So does anyone have any questions or any feedbacks on it?
So I have one comment. I think one area we should think about. I don't have any like immediate answers, but in general, being unable to trigger scale up is kind of one, let's say, failure mode in Autoscaler. This may be because, for example, there is no node group configured that has matching node selector. There is no node group which have enough CPUs and so on. But another quite common scenario is that cluster autoscaler triggers a scale up. However, this scale up fails on the cloud provider side. This may be due to issues like provider being out of capacity, for example, or some provider side quotas would be common ones. But there is, of course, many reasons, and I'm sure there is a lot of reasons specific to different providers. And the way this generally works is Autoscaler triggers scale up, and only later it generally asynchronously learns that this scale up has failed. And so we would also need to be able to reliably set the status condition in this case. I'm not sure if the Autoscaler today would be 100% reliable with this for a few different reasons. One reason is that if there is such failure, Autoscaler will rely either on provider error or a timeout before basically putting the particular node group on an exponential backoff and trying a different one. In principle, if you have enough node groups and if you're relying on timeouts, enough is, I think, 2 or 3, so not very much. Autoscaler can basically loop just retrying the same pools, not the same node groups, because the timeout compared to the backoff duration is quite significant. I think it's like half the maximum backoff duration. And so you could have a situation where basically Autoscaler just keeps retrying, but it never will be in a situation where there is no scale up to trigger. It's just going to basically kind of keep retrying between a few different configurations until it succeeds, which can take, in theory, infinite amount of time if it's a quota issue, for example. And so we need to somehow make this condition more reliable, which is also not that easy, because if we trigger a scale up and maybe it partially fails, So some nodes are added, but some are not. Like we request 10 nodes, but maybe 5 are added before we hit quota, for example. It's very hard to say which pods were the ones which are affected, because in principle we just calculate, like we don't do this per pod. It's just we look at all the pods, we calculate we need 10 nodes, now we get 5 of them, right? Let's say half the pods are now in a failed scale-up scenario and half are not. But really, it's all just bookkeeping. We don't know which particular pods are unschedulable, if that makes sense. So I think we need to think on the autoscaler side how we make this status condition reliable. I don't think we're quite there. So we need to figure that part out, I would imagine.
Okay, thanks. That's a good feedback on it. Honestly, I'm not super familiar with the cluster autoscale implementation. So yeah. So one, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think we need probably someone maybe from the cluster autoscaler community to help with this part, I guess, of the cap. And then I don't know how this looks in Carpenter. Right? I've seen them replying on the cap. So I think if we start this discussion, they can probably also contribute to it. I think error handling model there is slightly different. So it may be easier, but maybe we need to make sure it really works in both cases. So I think it would be best to have someone from Carpenter and someone from cluster autoscaler kind of contribute to the cap.
Okay. So can we discuss now who can contribute to, like, assign you or something?
I can talk, I think, internally with other cluster autoscaler maintainers and come back to you in a day or two over Slack in terms of who has the most capacity to help with this in timely manner, if that is okay.
Okay.
And then
sounds
we
good.
can ask Ellis probably to propose someone from Carpenter team. I think he's the best person for that request.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Amiko, you are the next.
Yeah, so we had a user who was asking us about this metric for NAP enabled, I think is what it's called. And so I was doing some investigation into that, and there's a command line flag for the cluster autoscaler called like node auto provisioning enabled. And it's been there for a very long time, and it's at least 6 years old. But when I looked, it seems like that flag is no longer being used. And I was just curious if anyone knew about it. Marcin, I noticed you were like the last person to touch it and get blamed, but that was like I said, that was like 6 years ago or something. So
Okay.
does anyone recognize this flag, or could we make an issue to deprecate it or something? Yeah, Maciek, I see you got your hand up.
I think we can honestly just delete it. We have cleaned up other code related to this. It's just basically we missed this, I think. So I don't think we need any particular deprecation, because I don't think it's like that. I think that flag basically does nothing. So
yeah, it doesn't do anything aside from twiddle something internally. Okay, I will make an issue for this, and I'll put it as like a first good issue. Maybe we can attract some contributors to come and get involved. I see
Sure.
Josh has his hand up too. Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, so I'm new here, and hi. I'm curious what the general policy is. Like, I would half expect release notes to even be retroactively backdated to say, by the way, this flag doesn't do anything as of X. Obviously, in general, I'm not likely to install an older version of Kubernetes, but is that a reasonable expectation?
Sorry, could you state that again, like to backport it and say this flag doesn't do anything, or what was the question there?
Basically, should the release notes be changed to say, by the way, as of version X, this flag that you could theoretically give doesn't actually do anything?
Yeah, I think when we remove it, it's probably nice to add that release note. But I see Guy's got his hand up, so.
Yeah, I guess I guess we probably actually need to check that I would assume that we did note it when we removed the rest of the code, is my assumption. We should probably double check that though. I do think we probably still need to go with the usual deprecation based on the fact that from my reading of that code, it's still a command line flag that people could set. So potentially if they still set it and we remove it, we could break some existing ones. So we probably do need to at least deprecate it with a warning with the usual period.
Maybe we could just delete the sort of the code behind it and then just remove it and mark it as deprecated and not doing anything, and then remove it later on.
I think so. Yeah.
Right.
Like
I
the
think-
code
I think-
behind it is like
Yeah.
there is no code behind it. It's just the flags and the metrics. That's it.
I think that's a sort of broader issue, by the way. I think there is quite a few autoscaler flags which probably are there because of historical reasons and are no longer used. Like another one that comes to my mind is I think you can set estimator with a flag because we used to have more than one. Now we just have one, so we literally have a flag with a single option and so on. And I think there is basically a lot of flags controlling various fields that I'm not even sure. Like I think basically some flags may do something, but probably not do the desired effect, right? Like, but basically, we're not really testing, and I don't know if anyone is testing something like 2/3 of the flags. And so I think a broader effort, maybe just to do a good sweep through and see which ones make sense and do a broader effort.
Yeah,
but
I
of
think
course, that one is more challenging because we know there is one flag that can be easily removed, but assessing which flags are actually working and doing what they are supposed to do is probably something that requires already quite some knowledge of Autoscaling.
Yeah, totally. Well, I mean, like what I will do if there are no objections is as I'm doing my investigation, I'll open individual issues for flags that I think could be removed, like this first one. And then maybe in that way we can at least start to capture which ones we think could be removed on an individual basis. Okay, cool. I'll take some time and make issues as I go then.
Okay, looks like that we are done with the agenda. Are there any other topics that you would like to discuss today? Josh?
So I'm looking at, so we run on Google Kubernetes, and the autoscaler that Google Kubernetes has the ability, the cluster autoscaler has the ability to add surge nodes. And I'm looking at some replicas where I'd like to be able to have surge replicas. And I'm wondering if that's something that has been never talked about or something that people would be willing to consider or entertain. And if so, what I would need to do in order to do such a thing. The idea of a surge node is basically there's a limit to quota effectively for the number of nodes that your autoscaler is allowed to have. But while you're doing a Kubernetes control plane upgrade, or rather the node pool upgrade, it's allowed to temporarily violate that constraint and get, say, one more node or two more nodes. And similarly, we have cases where we have replicas for something, and we have a PDB, a pod disruption budget, and there's a case where we would like to be, the autoscaler is trying to shift things around and wants to shut down the node. But because there is a pod running on that node, and there's the replicas for that says it must, with the pod disruption budget, says this pod can't go away, the node gets stuck. If there was a surge replica allowed for that deployment or replica set or whatever, then the system could actually add one more instance of that pod somewhere else that wasn't cordoned. And then once that arrives, the autoscaler could shoot the pod that's on the node that it wants to empty. And then the world would go back to the unsurged state. So that's the idea of the problem set.
Maciek, I believe you were the one who did a large part in the design how search upgrades works on GKE.
I mean, I think it's an interesting proposal. I don't have immediate, I think, clear opinion. I'd imagine some types of issues that I can see is basically around ownership model of like Autoscaler currently is not owner of deployment, and then can we get into some race conditions with something else that changes the size of deployment and so on, and there are multiple different controllers, so those would be one kind of issues, and things like RBAC around this also. So this seems like a broader change in terms of responsibility of Autoscaler, but technically it's probably possible.
Yeah,
What
I
about
don't.
At
those?
I
least for
don't.
some workloads. I mean, it certainly would need to be an opt-in behavior, because the fact that a workload sets PDB with, let's say, max unavailable 0 doesn't just mean it needs to have that number of replicas. It may mean that those pods just cannot be restarted. So it clearly would need to be an opt-in, and we'd need to figure out kind of issues, or if there are any issues around races with other components, mainly would be my thoughts.
I mean, at the end of the day, I'm assuming that the owner really isn't the autoscaler. I assume that, like, or rather, it feels like the HPA ends up owning it more so than the node autoscaler. But SIG autoscaling seemed like the first place to talk to, and I could find your meetings, so I'm here.
No, I think this is the right group. It's just basically extending the responsibility sort of Autoscaler, of cluster Autoscaler, quite significantly, in that today it manages nodes and it doesn't really do things with pods other than evicting them. And here it would be actually changing replica count, right? Which right now it's not even looking at replica counts. It's just operating on pods and not controllers. But I think basically this would require probably writing an IAP, or but I think the idea makes sense. Just probably requires some discussion and thinking too.
Okay, I take that as a positive. Where would I go and how would I start this? Given that I, for the most part, do not write Kubernetes core code.
So I think this conceptually this is sounds like an extension of the eviction mechanism that we have in CA, right? Instead of just evicting a pod, we would like to create a new replica for a given controller. So instead of manually tweaking the replica count of a controller, I would consider an alternative of extending the eviction API to support that, essentially. So whenever we create an eviction and the deployment is in some search mode, then the controller would be responsible for noticing that and creating a replica. So that from autoscalers, I wouldn't change that in autoscaler. I would change that in Kubernetes APIs, I guess what I'm trying to say.
This may be a good use case for Kata. You could have, say you had an auto-scaling, an HPA auto-controlled replica that scaled on some metric. You could add another trigger that could scale based upon some surge metric. And so once it detects you're in a surge state, it could increase the number of replicas. And then once the surge state goes away, it could decrease the number back down, and HPA would just decrease it again. That may be something worth investigating. Kata is not under the purview of SIG autoscaling, but it is now a CNCF project.
I think also based on Daniel's comment, right, which is another interesting idea of doing this. Like that shows that implementing it to SIG would have probably a few different approaches that should be analyzed, and then I guess a large requirement for this is for someone to drive the work on it. Like otherwise, it's likely just not going to happen, right? So I don't know if any of the existing contributors is interested in implementing this, given that it's likely to be quite a bit of work, or if if you want to volunteer to implement this, I think that drastically increases the chance of it actually happening.
I mean, I'm not opposed to writing Go code, but I would definitely need support.
I think we're happy to help. Probably best to approach through Slack and have some of the regular contributors help. But I'd imagine that would still probably need to be like at least driving and doing the main effort, especially of kind of pushing the discussion forward. That tends to be the time-consuming part. Would likely need you driving it.
That's fine. So I've stuck a link to the Slack where I first broached this topic in the chat, and I'm on Slack and quite happy to do some driving.
Okay, I'm happy to also try to look for some maybe Autoscaling contributor interested. I'm not making any promises, but I can ask around. That's probably going to take me a few days though. So I'm not saying I'll have anything tomorrow, but in a week or so, maybe 2 weeks, I'll see if I can find someone and I'll let you know.
That's fine. Thank you. I'm incredibly patient. I've been working on projects for a long time, and I expect when I was at Nokia, my estimated timeline for features was 18 months. If you can beat that, I'm happy.
I'll try to.
Okay, look that we have run out of time, unfortunately. So if you have any topics that you wanted to cover today, but you didn't manage to, please put them on the agenda and we will focus on them next week. In the meantime, take care, have a great week, and see you again next Monday. Take care, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.